It's always there. Sometimes the pain is a little, sometimes the pain's a bit more. I find that it's best if I try not to take any painkillers at all, because I find that they sort of like start to clog up my thinking process.
Dermot Martin has cancer. Instead of giving in to this life-threatening illness, Dermot has been inspired to look into his family background. Earlier this year, he went with Rosetta Life to Dublin to unearth the story of his great-uncle Tom, who had been involved in the Easter Rising of 1916.
I started off, I suppose, with a real romantic notion that here was a hero of the Rising that was as yet undiscovered, and it was one of those things. I just heard about it. I didn't know any details or anything in depth. So when I saw the photograph of him, and that's the first time I'd actually seen him, it sort of seemed to reach out to me and say, well, let's have a look and see what happened to him, because I didn't know anything about him really.
In late April 1916, several hundred Irish Republican rebels occupied the General Post Office in Dublin's O'Connell Street. My Uncle Tom was among them. The rebel aim was a united Ireland, free at last from the rule of the British. They held out for 5 days against overwhelming odds. But on the 29th of April, with much of the city centre reduced to rubble by British artillery, they surrendered. The rebel leaders were executed. Many were imprisoned, but my Uncle Tom was one of those who escaped. Quite frankly, from the scenes of devastation here, it would have been very, very frightening, and for him to have got away as he did would have left me in terror as well, to have got away from the sort of carnage that I see before me in pictures of O'Connell Street now. But you start off with a view that there is a family hero to be uncovered, and what you actually find is something slightly different, is a much more human story.
I've had cancer now for 5 years. I was diagnosed as a result of some severe pain quite a few years ago, and have been operated on a few times to try and clear it up. I'm now into experimental treatments to prolong my life, basically. I've had to stop work. I'm now one of the great masses on benefits, but I see that I've not fulfilled my own potential yet, and I feel that the same would be said for Tom.
The cancer came along while I was a senior manager for the post office in England. So all this is very familiar.
I started working at the post office straight from school, and I have to admit I loved it, and I stayed there, say, for all my career until the illness took over and meant I could no longer work. So I still feel a tremendous affinity to the post office. And I suspect if I worked here at the time in 1916, I would have been very upset that the GPO had been turned into ruins. To lose it in such a way would have been quite heartbreaking. And No, I would have felt it keenly as well. And so, on two levels, I feel quite an affinity to this place. I was a senior manager in the post office, and I would have quite happily still been there.
In terms of myself and my own being, I don't have a career anymore. I'd stopped striving to go up the ladder even further or to give 250% or whatever was expected of me at work. I had a disease and I had to take care of myself. Couldn't burn the candle at both ends and expect to get away with it ad infinitum.
I'm married. My wife Sally and I have a 9-year-old son called Rory.
In terms of my relationship with my son, I think it's been very, very good for me. Since I've given up work, I've had much more time with him, and that's been a lovely experience for me to be around much more while he's growing up. But also this, I've got time to pursue this. I never would have dreamt of pursuing this when I was still working. It just wouldn't have happened.
We're just coming to Glasnevin Cemetery. This is the place where I believe, well, I know Tom was buried here, but I have absolutely no idea where. Could be anywhere. And there's a Dermot there, right in front of me. Not related, but there is one there. So give him the details to the chap, roughly when he died.
What was his address?
12 St Ignatius Avenue.
Frank?
Yeah.
24 and a half. That's in St Paul's.
Basically, I'm here by the grace of Spanish sea urchins.
Crossroads there. And what you need to do then is turn down to your right.
What happens is the poison is extracted from them.
TF, A, B, C, D. Keep going up till you get to T.
T.
And made up into a form of chemotherapy for me, which they give me every 3 weeks. At the moment it's working, it's giving me continued life. So I have the treatment every 3 weeks. Unfortunately, for about a week to 10 days of that, I feel very, very sick with it and tired and very irritable. And it's that part of me that I really don't like at all. Is in terms of what it does to me and what it changes within me. It turns me from being a reasonable, mild-mannered man into quite frankly, a horrible person sometimes. So I turn into a bit of a monster. It's very hard for my wife and my son to see a person that they know and love turn into someone else. It's not a different person. It's still me, except for the fact that the thing that what I'd call the veil of humanity that keeps us all these energies repressed suddenly are in very, very short supply. So I find it very difficult to contain them.
So Q, R, S, and T. So somewhere here.
Tom was in the GPO, and I understand he was there for 4 or 5 days as a medical orderly. I think that they thought initially it would be over very quickly, that they would seize power and make their point and march out pretty damn quick. What actually happened was that it turned into a siege over there, and they were over there for quite a bit longer. Now, the medical supplies ran out, so there was nothing more that Tom could do, and they were surrounded. And as I understand it, Tom got out using the tunnel Now, quite where the tunnel comes up over here, I don't know. But the tunnel is definitely down below the barber shop, and it heads a couple of directions. One way towards the cathedral and another way out onto O'Connell Street.
My family used to run the barber shop on Cathedral Street. It's just across the road from the post office. The actual shop's not there anymore, but back then I think it was a clandestine meeting place for Republican sympathisers.
You know, you're supposed to be giving me a shave. My mother saw the tunnels, but she never fully explored them. The reason why she didn't explore them was because she was a bit frightened of them because they're completely dark. And so she relied on family history that told her that they were there, they were used, who used them, and how Tom used them to make good his escape.
My grandfather, Peter Doyle, my mum's dad, he was involved in the GPO in 1916. This man here, he gave this photograph of all the old IRA people. They were all involved, well, I don't know about the women now, but they were all involved in the GPO 1916.
Everyone I'm meeting in Dublin seems to know someone who was part of the action back then in 1916.
But the grandfather's probably a rebel, I say, you know. This guy here, Peter's name.
Okay. He's ready for you.
Maybe there's something about barbers in 1916.
They could be related.
Could be.
You never know.
The barber shop has quite a lot of meaning because it was then the family business, and not only gave him sort of sanctuary during the rising, but when Tom could no longer continue his training as a doctor, he switched to becoming a hairdresser. So the hairdressing shop also became his career. His career. He can no longer continue as a medical student because he'd gone on a run, and to go back and do that would have meant giving himself up, and he wasn't prepared to do that. He lost his career, not just his career, he lost his house and his wife. But
Okay.
looking back in a very narrow focus on my life, you can draw a parallel. I've had to give up, although I haven't given up on life, or family or anything like that. I've had to give up work, and sometimes I do ask myself whether I should have continued on. The tunnel underneath the barber shop went two ways. Across to the GPO and across to the Pro Cathedral.
You want to wander in?
Yeah.
So down here there might be something.
There might be another way through. That's the hole. Yes, you can see.
But hoping to see if there's a route through to the old barber shop, where further up the road towards O'Connell Street, and then just see if there's any more tunnels leading off across O'Connell Street, like I believe there to be.
Something.
There might be another way through.
Yeah.
Should we go have a look? Yeah. Eliza Brown, 9th of December 1905.
I positively deny that I'm going to die, but not a denial of my disease. Having treatment every 3 weeks, it's there, it's upon me. The opportunity has been given to me to do some other things with my life, not just sit at home and mope around with the cancer. Would I choose it? And the answer is no, I'd never choose it.
Is that okay, is it?
They don't mind.
I don't know.
They will be forgiven from it.
But it is very difficult living with a host of side effects that are toxic for me, and yet still
knowing that's what's keeping me alive. I suppose the culmination was a little while ago when I felt that it was starting to get a little bit too much. This alter ego was taking over for too long and making me feel very bad about myself and my family life. I sat down with Sally and said, look, shall I give it up, the treatment? And we sat down, and the alternative is death. It's as stark a contrast as that. Do I live on and be a nice person for a little while, and knowing that the tumours will start growing again and will kill me?
Elizabeth Cronin.
Or do I carry on with the treatment, which thankfully is holding the tumours at the moment and giving me this extra life? Which choice do I make? And the choice was made up very quickly for me by Sally. Live is the choice that we made, so we carry on.
I think I found the route through to the hairdressers. This is the correct direction, and listening to it I can hear the traffic from O'Connell Street. So I believe this is the way through, and all the way through to the hairdressers and then on to the GPO beyond. Yes, this is it, I'm sure.
Well, I'm always aware of my own mortality. The fear is that this is going to creep up and will overtake me at some point. Well, that is the outcome unless something else is found to give me the cure. Going round and seeing the gravestones and ultimately knowing that we'd be looking for Tom's grave has sort of kept me focused on the fact that yes, he died and it will happen to me as well.
6. That is 26 and a half. 25 and a half. Here.
I had half a vision of us having to do a lot of searching for a headstone, which it's lucky that we didn't have to do, because that would have been completely fruitless, because there isn't one here. But it is nice to know that this is where he is, and we can come and see him from time to time.
So I'm now standing on Tom.
I mean, there's nothing here to tend, but there's nothing even to remember him by. It's one of those things, so it's where he is. I know where he is now, so I can come and say hello and talk to him.
In terms of looking for the hero, that's not happened. What I found is a man that's in effect been driven on by a passion for a united Ireland, an independent Ireland, who'd have seen all of that turn to dust. He was studying to be a doctor. He had to stop that. He was on the run for 6 years. He lost his wife, he lost his house, in effect, he stopped being a man that was contributing to society and turned into just a bachelor who ended up afraid of his own shadow. I see a parallel between ourselves, between having great hopes for life and carrying on as forever as a family man, and carrying on my career in the post office in the UK. And what's basically happened for me is that that's all been turned on its head by the disease. And I feel that the same would be said for Tom, that he really felt that his potential was all washed away with the rising of 1916.
I try to spend some time every day to visualise myself being better, for my own body to turn itself around and to not be having this anymore. I mean, I know it's perhaps a little bit hypocritical, but I mean, I know I have prayers said for me and things like that. I'm not going to deny, I feel better about that. And I mean, the more the merrier, so if people want to pray for me, then fine. This film is dedicated to my wife, Sally, and my son, Rory.